Hi, this is Nira Ayal back with another edition of the four parts to becoming indistractable. Thrilled you're back with us. Today, we are going to talk about the second part of becoming indistractable. How do we make time for traction? Let's remember that the first step to becoming indistractable is all about mastering those internal triggers. The second step is to make sure that we make time for traction in our life, reminding ourselves that traction is any action that pulls us towards what we say we're going to do, things that we do with intent, things that move us towards our values and help us become the kind of person we want to become. What we have to ask ourselves is, are we spending our time in a way that is consistent with our values? And a good model for understanding this question to hold ourselves accountable to make sure we don't get distracted from the things that are important to us is to think of our life as these three life domains. You are at the center of these three life domains, then your relationships, and finally your work life. So we're going to walk through these three life domains and make sure that we're acting consistently and with integrity around what we do every single day to make sure that we are spending our time in acts of traction rather than frivolous distraction. So let's dive right in by remembering a few very important keys to turning our values into time. Number one, let's remember that we cannot call something a distraction unless we know what it is distracting us from. How can we possibly say that we got distracted by something if we don't even know what it was we wanted to do with our time? So it's fundamental that we ask ourselves, how do we want to spend our time? And the way we do this is by making sure that our calendar is a reflection of our values. What are values? Values are defined as attributes of the person you want to become. And it's absolutely critical that we ask ourselves, hey, am I spending my time in the same way that the person I would want to become would spend their time? Now, a great technique to do this is called time boxing. Time boxing your day uses an age-old technique called making an implementation intention. It's been studied by psychologists for decades now as an incredibly effective and important technique, just a fancy way of saying planning out what you're going to do and when you're going to do it. And remember, this process is not set in stone. The idea here is to reflect and refine your calendar over time to make sure that it becomes easier for you to follow your schedule, your time box day, so that it can become easier and easier to follow over time. And you're going to make small adjustments to make sure you're living out your values. So let's dive right in by asking ourselves how we can live in accordance with our values with these three life domains, starting with making sure that we control the inputs, not the outputs. You know, so many of us are wedded and slaves to our to-do list. We run our lives with these to-do lists. But of course, if you've ever talked to anybody who slavishly works through their to-dos on the to-do list, they're never done. There's always more to do. So instead, what we want to do is to make sure we control the inputs being your time and your attention, and not worrying so much about the outputs, because studies find that people who just focus on the input of time and attention, they actually get more done. They accomplish more in their day than the people who run their life on a to-do list. So what I want to do is to first start with you. You are at the center of these three life domains. You've got to schedule time for yourself first. For whatever attributes of the person you want to become revolve around the things that you yourself need. And remember, I'm not telling you what you should do with your time. I want to help you do whatever it is that you yourself want to do with your time, whether that's time for exercise, prayer, meditation, reading, whatever is important for you in that life domain. Make sure you have that time scheduled in your calendar and show up when you say you will. Think about it. If one of your heroes called you up, let's say, a politician you admire, maybe a president of the United States called you up, or maybe an entertainer, maybe Oprah Winfrey calls you, or your athletic hero called you up and said, hey, I would really love to take you out to lunch. Do you have time? Well, of course, you'd stop everything to make sure you could have time with a famous person that you really admire. And so why, let me ask you, do we not keep our commitments to ourselves? If we say we're going to show up for ourselves, we're the most important person in our lives, right? We've got to take care of ourselves first before we can take care of other people. So when you put that time on your calendar to make sure that you get proper rest, nutrition, exercise, education, whatever it is that you want to do to invest in yourself, make sure you keep that commitment to yourself and keep it just as you would for someone you really admire. Now, what we want to also make sure that we take care of that input. That is the seminal factor on whether we will get that output. It's all about your time and attention. And if you control your time and attention and show up when you say you will get the output you're looking for. The next life domain is the relationship domain. Right now in the United States and all over the world, actually, we are in a loneliness epidemic. That we do not have proper time for the important relationships in our life. And the reason is that we give people in our lives whatever scraps of time are left over. We call this the residual benefactor. Whatever scraps of time are left over after we do everything else that's important in our life, then we give it to our loved ones. Well, that's not good enough. The most important people in our lives deserve time scheduled on your calendar. Go beyond those date days and do more than just plan a little bit of scraps of time here and there. Plan significant time to bond with, whether it's your spouse, your kids. A very overlooked relationships is our friendships. Adults report having fewer friendships today than ever before. And the reason is that we don't have that time scheduled on our calendars. So for a few very, very important friendships in my life, I have on my schedule time in perpetuity with these friends, right? So we don't have to schedule back and forth constantly. We know, hey, I'm talking to my friend Jeff. We're talking every last Sunday of the month. That is on our calendar. We're going to have a phone call every month. So put that time in your schedule for your most important relationships, because if we don't do that, a lack of closeness, a lack of those friendships is actually hazardous to your health. Believe it or not, we know that a lack of close relationships is as detrimental to your health as smoking and obesity. And so if you care about your physical as well as your psychological well-being, make that time on your schedule to live out your values of being someone who takes care of others and lets others take care of them by planning time for these important relationships in your life. And finally, your work domain. Your work domain is probably what you might already be scheduling, but this is actually the last of the three domains that we need to worry about. First, we have to take care of ourselves, the you domain, then the relationships, and then finally, this third life domain of your work. Now, this is a very important category, of course. For many of us, it's our livelihoods, and we want to adjust this part of our schedule as frequently as our schedule changes. So for most people, myself included, about 80% of the population, we can predict what's going to happen in the week ahead. So every Sunday night, I have in my calendar time to reflect upon my calendar for work and make sure that I have adequate time booked, set aside, preserved, and protected for the important aspects of my job. That time when I can work without distraction, the important work that requires creativity, that requires focus, that requires me to pay attention and think on one thing at a time. That time has to be set aside on your calendar. But when things change, right, from week to week, that's okay. You can look at that calendar for the week ahead and make small adjustments. Now, some people, their calendar changes every day. That's fine. What I coach them to do is to sit down first thing in the morning and look at that day ahead. Don't change your calendar in the moment. That's a big mistake. That defeats the whole purpose. So as frequently as your calendar changes from day to day or from week to week, we want to make sure that we make those small adjustments for the week or the day to come. Don't change your calendar during that moment. What we also want to do, and this is a huge, very important piece of advice, is to sync our schedule with the important stakeholders in our life. Once you have that physical artifact, once you have a time box calendar made, you can share it with other people. You can sit down with your boss, you can sit down with your spouse, and you can do what I call a schedule sync. And you can look at that calendar and you can coordinate around what you have planned for your day. Think about it this way. When you sit down with your boss, if you can show your boss, hey boss, this is what I plan to do with my day. You see how I budgeted out my time? Now you see this other list here of things that I don't know where to put in my calendar. If there's something that's more important, can you help me flip-flop, right? Can you help me say, hey, something on this list is more important, let's put it in your calendar. What you're doing is asking your boss to help you prioritize. That's your boss's most important job, and you need their input. As opposed to what most people do is they have this list of to-dos and their boss has no insight into how they spend their time. So believe me, your boss will worship the ground you walk on if you do this schedule sync. Now, there's a lot more information on how to do that in my book, Indistractable, as well. I hope you'll go check that out. So I hope you've enjoyed this session on how to become indistractable. As a quick summary, make sure to turn your values into time, control the inputs, not the outcomes, schedule those important relationships so they don't fall by the wayside, schedule sync with the important stakeholders in your work life as well as home. As always, you can find more about me on my website, nirandfar.com, or you can also follow me on LinkedIn at /Nir Eyal. You can see my name right there, Nireyal. My blog again is nirandfar.com, spell like my first name, nirandfar.com. I hope you'll join me next time where we'll go into the next step of becoming indistractable. Until then, stay strong, stay indistractable.